Good afternoon, everyone. This is Bob West. I'm Chief Security Officer for Palo Alto's Prisma Cloud Division. If you're not familiar, that's our cloud security division. And I'm going to go through our latest cloud threat report. And hopefully all of this makes sense to you. Um, what I thought I would do is, before I start going through the report, is just give you some background in terms of what we see in cloud ecosystems and what does that mean to you. So I'd say a couple things that we are going through one of the largest technology transformations of my career. And just to give you some background, I started working in technology in '84. Grew up in networks, operating systems, and then started working in security in '95. I've had a couple of CISO roles, two of them with large banks. Did consulting with Deloitte, E&Y on my own, and joined Palo Alto about a year and a half ago. Interestingly enough, for those of you that have been around the government for a while, uh, I met Bob West, who was CISO at DHS. Oh, this must have been 2004, and I was CISO at Fifth Third Bank, and so who knew? So when I'm talking to people in the federal government space in the United States, I like to introduce myself as the private sector Bob West. But at any rate, we've been going through this transformation for about the last dozen years in terms of digital transformation, moving to the cloud, and fundamentally, it makes a lot of sense. Not just from a financial perspective, and it may sound a bit trite, but it literally does make you more agile as an organization. So, for example, back in my Bank One days, a little over 20 years ago, we implemented the Artist, formerly known as Siebel Systems, and we spent about $100 million implementing it over a couple of years. We had the data center costs, the cost of people managing infrastructure, people managing applications, and Salesforce came along. And so think of, rather than spending $100 million to implement, think of a fraction of that. Think of the fraction of the license cost. You don't have data center costs, and rather than implementing it over a couple of years, you're talking about weeks or perhaps a number of months in terms of implementing the environment. And if you think back to February, March of 2020, when the pandemic started, organizations needed to shift the way they work. Most people were working from home, at least people that are not in customer-facing roles in retail, for example. But organizations really had to figure out very, very quickly, how do I provide the technology to my organization so that we can continue to function? And at the same time, we were dealing with aggressive threats, right? It's typical nation state threat actors. The conflict in Ukraine started up a year ago and change, about a year and a half ago, February of 22. And so throughout this period, we've been dealing with these threats. And so I always get this visual of a plane in flight has an issue and you have to fix it while it's in the air. And that's what it feels like to me. I think the other thing that I would say is that there are still a number of people that perceive operating in the cloud is less secure than managing traditional infrastructure. And I always couch that with the fact that about 3,000 companies are informed by the FBI every year that they've been compromised, and that's the first time they're hearing about it. And if things are done properly, moving to the cloud is either neutral, and depending on the environment, it reduces the risk. That being said, you're still responsible as an organization to protect the information that you have, and it's particularly critical in the Department of Defense. And then I look back at the Software Modernization Act that DoD is going through, and the implementation plan was issued in March. And there's a couple of goals for that plan. It's anything from the increased adoption of enterprise-approved clouds to modernize a cloud environment, both from a security and a networking perspective. There's the notion of implementing a software factory ecosystem, implementing continuous authorization, and developing and expanding the digital workforce. The software factory, I think, is one of the most critical things that you need to pay attention to. And the reason I say that is because if you think of the vast majority of developers, when they learned to code, they were not taught how to code securely. And as an organization, if you don't teach developers good security hygiene, they start making basic mistakes. And certainly in the private sector, there's an incredible number of systemic software issues. And you have the buzzword bingo term shift left, right, which effectively means build security in from square one. So you can't just protect applications when they've been implemented. You need to include security from the design phase. And part of that is really educating people so they do understand what good security hygiene is. And when I think of the major projects that are happening within the Department of Defense, I think of JWCC, and I just think of fundamental issues in terms of protecting environments, and that's what we're dealing with. So let me dive into the report. This report was published in March of this year, and we gathered information from about 1,000 organizations, a little over 200,000 cloud environments, and over 70,000 repositories. And you can certainly go to our website and download the Cloud Threat Report. I'm only going to go through several high-level items for you today. There's a lot more meat in the report. So hopefully you have an opportunity to see it. So one of the things that was clear that stood out in the report is that cloud users repeatedly make the same mistakes. And this could be anything from integrating or the lack of integration of security into applications, the lack of proper authentication and authorization. There are a number of things that we see. And in conjunction with that, most organizations take approximately 145 hours to resolve alerts. So think what can happen in 145 hours. You're talking about 6-7 days. And think of a bad actor that's getting into a system and what can be done in that period of time. That's really significant. And unless an organization makes changes and you in fact can't respond in a shorter time frame, it creates a significant amount of risk for an organization. We also saw that sensitive data was in a good number of storage buckets that were exposed to the internet. A little bit over 63% of them contained sensitive data. Multi-factor was not continuously enforced for cloud users. And when you think of attack vectors and what the bad actors are trying to achieve, one of the fundamental things they're trying to do is take over accounts. And the ideal scenario is they take over accounts that have administrative rights, or they can take over a regular user account and ideally escalate privileges. And if you don't have multi-factor authentication in place, then it's really much, much easier for a bad actor to take advantage of that environment. Leaked credentials and source code are a systemic issue. We saw that 83% of organizations had hard-coded credentials in their source control management systems. And, this is nothing new. We've seen in code for decades that IDs and passwords were embedded and are still being embedded into applications, but it creates unnecessary risk. So think of what happens if in fact you do have that uh, if you do have hard-coded credentials in source code, someone gains access to it. It just makes it that much easier to take advantage of the environment. And then 85% of environments have hard-coded credentials that have virtual machines user data. So it's just a significant systemic issue. Um, Software supply chain attacks are on the rise. And this is significant because rather than developing code line by line, most developers are taking modules and pulling them together. And it can be a combination of code that's written by an individual or by an organization, or they may be taking it from open source repositories. So the challenge becomes, what do those open source modules and other modules contain, right? I mean, do they have any unwanted features? And so this is one of the things that we have begun to focus on quite a bit. We actually acquired a company in December that's focused on software supply chain protection. The other thing is that managing code dependencies is challenging. We saw that 77% of required packages and vulnerabilities are introduced by non-root packages. And then one of the other things that we saw was that unpatched vulnerabilities are something that the bad actors take advantage of. We saw that 63% of code bases that were in production have unpatched vulnerabilities that are high or critical. I've seen organizations that, for a variety of reasons, and in general, the explanation for not patching vulnerabilities regularly comes to a lack of people and disagreements in terms of process. But think of things like Log4j, right? Think of when Log4j became an issue, if it had taken people a significant period of time to make changes and patch their environments. It was a significant issue to begin with, and we saw that a substantial number of companies either had significant downtime in their systems or it was impacting their ability to generate revenue. So making sure that you have a really good hold on patching vulnerabilities becomes a very high priority. I would say in a very broad context, cloud attack surfaces grow primarily because organizations are continuing to accelerate their adoption of cloud environments. There are additional features and workloads. Threat actors are getting, I'm not so sure if they're getting smarter and more powerful, but they certainly have the time and the focus to take advantage of environments. I think of nation states, whether it's the Chinas or Russias, they have large number of people that are focused on stealing intellectual property from companies and governments. And I think if there's a place where you can say they're getting smarter, it's in the use of malware and the adoption of artificial intelligence. We've been getting a lot of focus around generative AI over the last 4 or 5 months. And you have to make the assumption that not only the technology is being used for good intentions, but also the bad actors are using it. And it becomes a significant issue because if you can create the right process and use AI in a logical fashion, you can scale, you can make much more aggressive attacks. And so that's a significant issue. I was telling you earlier about the issues with open source software. Clearly it's widely adopted, and it's adopted because open source software modules exist, right? And they're easy to inject into code that's being written. But again, you have to understand, so what does this open source module contain? I think the other thing, when I think of what's the right way to protect information. I look at things from an architectural perspective, and the simpler the architecture, the better. And one of the things that most organizations have challenges with is managing their application portfolio. And so, one of the things that becomes really important is really understanding what is the number of tools you have, which ones make sense, and how can you reduce the number of them and use them as consistently as possible so that you can protect environments as well as you can. Um, this has a lot of our logos on it. I'm going to speak to this generically, but if you think of a broad ecosystem, here are the things that you need to take into account as you implement and manage cloud environments. So there's a certain percentage of applications that are implemented using lift and shift that are not modified. The ideal scenario is that you're implementing or re-architecting applications so that they're cloud native. We see that ultimately there's a hybrid environment that exists, that X number of applications sit in public and hybrid clouds, and a certain number of them will be in private clouds and on-premise. One of the big challenges is shadow IT, so it's very easy to put an application on a credit card and begin to use it. And if you don't have the right controls and visibility, then it's number one, you don't know what you have. And if you don't know what you have, then it's hard to protect them. Then there's the SaaS applications that organizations use, anything from traditional front-end applications like the ServiceNows and Boxes, Office 365, et cetera. And finally, it's important to distill and integrate everything into security operations centers. So the ideal scenario is you understand what you have, what's running, what the issues are. And if you understand that, then it gives you the ability to respond and address any issues as they emerge. So that is my presentation. I know we have a couple of minutes left, and I'll be happy to take some questions if you have any. I know we shared the presentation with the organizers, and we will certainly make those available to you. So hopefully that information is helpful. You know, I think the other thing while we're waiting for questions, I would say is that there's a lot of organizations that think that they're using one cloud or a couple of clouds from a platform perspective. And the counsel that I generally give is assume that you have a multi-cloud environment, whether it's intentional or not. And if you make that assumption, what are the tools that you need to use to protect the environments? You know, the major cloud service providers have very good tools, but they're designed for their environments. And so if you think of a Microsoft Azure or AWS, great tools, but AWS's tools, for example, will not function in Google Cloud or Azure. And so having one set of tools consistently that allow you to protect information consistently across multiple clouds is the ideal environment. I think the other thing, when most organizations start their cloud journey, the first thing they need to do is understand, so what do I have? And so using posture management tools to understand what's my cloud estate and what's its security health. Those are the things that are going to be very helpful and really help you, not just in the transition to the cloud, but as you manage the environment. You have to go back regularly and understand, what do I have? What's changed? What's the security health? And I'm sure if you're security professionals that are dialing in, you know, this is a journey. It's something that we have to pay attention to regularly and revisit, because technology changes, organizations change, and as a consequence, you have to just keep the diligence up and make sure that you're doing your best to protect the environment. I think we're very close to running out of time right now. So I really appreciate your attending the session and hope this was helpful to you.